Now, let me begin the second day of the webinar. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow says, "Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time." With these beautiful lines, I would like to wish good morning to all. Yesterday, we had listened eminent scholars who were known across the country, and today we will also come across eminent teachers from the Department of English and Department of Sociology. Now, I will take the opportunity to warmly welcome from core of my heart the most esteemed and honored speaker, Professor T. Mark, sir. It is indeed privilege to welcome such a speaker who is known across this country and who is expert for subaltern voices and Dalit literature. With these words, now I request our today's guest, Professor T. Marks, to address the August gathering. But before that, I would take the opportunity to read his bio note. Professor T. Marks is from Department of English, Pondicherry University. He has a specialization in drama, comparative literature, subaltern studies, and translation. He nurtures his interest in drama, cultural studies, and subaltern historiography. Research guide, so far as research guidance is concerned, under his supervision, 4 PhD scholars have been awarded, 5 submitted, MPhil 15 awarded, adjudication of PhD 98, adjudication of MPhil 18, adjudication of publication proposals of books 2, examiner for PhD viva voce 44. Publication, books published 15 in English, 2 in Tamil, paper published in English International 15, National 15, paper published in Tamil 7. Seminar and conference, sir has presented papers 9 international, 30 national, invited lectures 25, lectures in orientation and refresher 13, session chaired in seminar 20. He has teaching experience of 18 years, 14 years to PG students. He has been member of several prestigious boards and council, such as member of panel for confidential work at UPSC New Delhi, member of preliminary panel for the award of Bal Sahit Puruskar 2012, member of preliminary panel for the award of Yuva Puruskar 2011, member of preliminary panel for the award of Sahit Akademi in 2009. He has been subject expert for curriculum development in Tamil Nadu State Council of Education, Educational Research and Training, subject expert for interview panel for the selection of assistant professor of English for Christian College, Kataka, Kerala. Now, academic outreach, editorial assistant for the International Journal of South Asian Studies, editorial board member of Literary Innovation and International Literary Journal, associate editor for Manas, a literary journal, designed the syllabi for media studies, hardcore, Dalit literature, print culture, contemporary literature and culture, visual culture, communication and disability studies, and film studies as well. Sir has recently translated a book, Pirago, into and then in English, published by Emerald Publisher, Chennai. Now, I would like to welcome Professor T. Marks with his topic, Resisting Hegemonic Discourse, a reading of Dalit writing. Please, sir, you are welcome. One thing, I have shortened your bio note, but still, sir, your reputation and name is across South India and North India. So due to limitation of time, I have shortened your bio. Sir, you are welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Aslam. It was such a lengthy introduction. Thank you so much. Dear Muhammad Aslam, dear Dr. Nabarun Ghosh, the joint convener, dear Ms. Bharti Raj from HD Jain College, Aura, Bihar, another joint convener, the respected principal and head of the Department of English, Jagjiwan College, Aura, learned teaching fraternity, research college, student friends, very good morning to you all. Indeed, it's my privilege and pleasure to be part of this two-day national webinar on Quest for Equality in Unequal India, a dialogue on Dalit literature, gender, aesthetic, art, and activism. In fact, when I was invited to address the learned audience in this two-day webinar, I'm very happy. And when I went through the brochure, I enjoyed the title, and I appreciate the organizing committee for framing such an interesting, very impressive title for this webinar. Especially when you talk about quest for equality in an unequal setting. I'm reminded of Tennessee Williams's famous lines, unequal laws to unequal people. When the whole social system is unequal, we need unequal laws to fill the gap. And the dialogue, the second section of the title, the second segment of the title goes a dialogue on Dalit literature, gender, aesthetic, art, and activism, which covers almost all the aspects of subaltern writings in India, in the Indian context. So let me begin my lecture by tracing this specific emergence, the emergence of Dalit writings, the emergence of Dalit art, the emergence of Dalit writings in the print media, in the visual media, the emergence of Dalit space, the emergence of Dalit culture in the mainstream space, in the mainstream itself. All these things, when we trace these the emergences of these things, we need to go back to, as usual, to the Western apparatus. So in the West and also in the Orient, we have a tradition which was very much conservative in nature and which was not an all-inclusive kind of a culture. So even in the field of, I'll start with the field of the comparative literature. In the field of comparative literature also, one can find that when the great scholars of comparative literature were trying to trace the similarities, trace compare two different works belonging to two different contexts, what they were trying to do was they were trying to compare two different works from two different contexts, and perhaps they were trying to reach out some similarities out of their comparison of two different texts, and this has become the main apparatus of the comparative literary school, comparative literature school, or comparative literature studies. So this itself has a lacuna of, when two scholars try to compare and contrast two different works, ultimately their objective is to reach the similarities of those two works. So ultimately their very objective, their political objective was to unify the whole Europe. So the problem of the comparative literary studies school was they tried to choose two different works from only from and within the European context, and not from any non-European context. That was the first problem with the comparative literary studies school. So they always chose two different texts only within the European context, and they tried comparing those two texts, and they came out with some findings which were based on the similarities of those two texts. But then what they tried to bulldoze was, in the whole process of their comparison of two different texts, but within the European context, their political aim was to unify the disintegrated Europe. That is one reason why when T.S. Eliot was crying heart and soul, let humanity be one and literature should be one, or literature should be one because humanity is one. For him, humanity is not the whole world humanity, but only the European Christian humanity. So when Europe was disintegrated, T.S. Eliot and his companions, his colleagues, were trying to unify Europe under one umbrella called European Christianity. So they had that kind of a politics in mind when they cried for humanity as one and literature as one. And this kind of a pedestal on which comparative literary studies, right? The whole school of comparative literature was based on, or rests on. This kind of a study had its own. This kind of a school had its own weaknesses. So this weakness was first detected or recognized and brought to the whole world, the notice of the whole world, by non-European intellectuals, but working in the Western academia. More specifically, I would mention three important names: Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, Edward Said, and Homi Bhabha. These three non-Western intellectuals, but working in the Western academia, these three people started navigating, started detecting this specific weakness, and they tried to include the non-Western text also for comparison in the schools for comparative literature. And this itself was viewed as a very big revolution in the West, because for the first time the schools of comparative literature started incorporating, including the non-Western texts for their comparison. But then that itself was not very much radical or revolutionary, because even those texts which were chosen from the non-Western context were canonical texts and mainstream texts only. So there was no comparative studies, comparing one author from the Afro-American context and the subaltern writers context in the Indian in the Orient. So there was no comparative studies between Paul Marshall and Bama, or Langston Hughes and somebody else in the Indian context. So this specific thing was another weakness, yeah, even when non-Western texts were chosen for comparison in the Western academia. So this specific detection, that's the West versus the rest. So the West versus the rest dichotomy, even when it was detected, when it was pointed out to the Western academia, the Indian intellectuals, even in the case of the subaltern studies movement, with the emergence of Ranajit Guha and others, what they were trying to do was they were trying to represent. They were not representing them, as Karl Marx always complains. There's a big gap between representation and representation. This school of subaltern studies in India, the SSG Subaltern Studies Group, these scholars belonging to the subaltern studies group were trying to represent the unheard voices, represent the subaltern voices. They never tried to represent them as their voices aware, or as their voices are supposed to be. So with this specific complaint, with this specific accusation against the elitist tendency in all spheres of knowledge across the world, and because we cannot discuss Dalit literature in isolation, I'm trying to trace the whole knowledge systems, the knowledge systems of the whole world. So when there were universals, the differences were bulldozed. So those differences, when you try to construct a meta narrative of something, a macro narrative of something, what is visibly missing is the micro narratives, the micro cultures. So these subcultures, the microcultures, the micro oral narratives of the natives, of the tribals, of Dalits, of the blacks, of the First Nations, of the Australian autochthonous people, all these autochthonous people's voices have been completely neglected in the mainstream and for the common readers. So with this specific demand in mind, writers belonging to the marginalized sections, they started they started expressing their own sufferings in their own language, in their own styles. So this specific countermeasure, right, this specific writing, as Jean-Paul Sartre always believes in it, and he says, all writing by nature is political, be it a novel or a short story or a testimonial or an autobiography or a biography or an essay, a leave letter or a love letter. Any writing by nature is political, highly political. So these writers who were hitherto neglected in the mainstream, the public space, these writers started writing their own self. So these writers started writing, recording their own collective experiences, the collective experiences of the community itself. So this is how black writing, the Afro-American writings emerged. In the African context, all kinds of indigenous writings emerged. In the Australian context, the Aboriginal writings emerged. In all other spaces, all kinds of micro narratives started getting recognized. So this specific recognition of the micro narratives is the starting point. And with this starting point, India too got the opportunity of the celebration of the centenary of Dr. Ambedkar. With that started the exact proliferation of all these subaltern texts, the Dalit texts or the tribal texts, or the texts about the transgenders, texts about the transsexuals, texts from sex workers. All these marginal writings emerged in the 1970s, 80s, and more prominently in the 90s. So from the 90s, we have got very prolific writers like Bama Shivagami. We got the publication of Vasant Moon's autobiography. We got Baby Kamble. We got all these very Kalyan Rao in Andhra Pradesh. So we Aravind Malagatti, all these writers, we received their writings only in the post LPG period, the liberalization, privatization, and globalization period in the Indian context. So this specific, so Dalit literature as such, as a genre, as a segment of writing, as a unit of writing, emerged in the 1970s more prominently. But in the year 1956, Baburao Bagul and all other his Marathi Dalit friends and intellectuals, they all sat together to discuss a new form of writing that all these Dalit writers were writing, and they couldn't get a space, a public space for publishing their manuscripts. So in the conference, in the first conference, it was Babura Bagul who coined the term Dalit in that specific conference, which means broken people, disintegrated people, and suppressed, oppressed, and people with excruciating human experiences are termed as Dalits. So in that way, you would have seen many scholars even arguing that Dalit does not represent only the untouchables of India, but even people who were very much historically neglected and abandoned. So in that way, the word Dalit is a very powerful alternative word to refer to India's neglected masses. More importantly, and more commonly, it is referred to the untouchables of India. So the Dalit writings, the first form of resisting the hegemonic discourses of India emerged with the publication of the Indian Hut, La Chamia Indienne, a very prominent French text written by Bernardin the Saint. So this Bernardin the Saint has written the Indian Hut. It's available in English, translation, titled The Indian Hut, wherein a French historian, travel historian, he visited India and he heard about the four-tier Indian caste system, social system, which divides the whole system into four, and there are people who could not even belong to these four tiers. Those people were called Panchamas, Avarnas, or untouchables. So this specific five groups of people, five clear, tier-oriented system, he wanted to examine, he wanted to analyze, and he started living in the houses of all these five categories of people. And then he records his experiences in this specific book, the La Chamia Indienne. La Chamia Indienne, he lives with all these communities. And finally, he lives with an untouchable in the untouchable hut, which is the very title, is eponymous, that it refers to the hut of an untouchable. So this specific untouchable's house, wherein he got some kind of enlightenment, by living with all these five categories of people, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Shudras, Vaishyas, and the Avarnas, the Mlechas, he has experienced and he has analyzed his own experience and the people's experience. And he has summed up the book conclusively he says that the life of this specific untouchable is more and more and more eco-friendly, non-exploitative, and very much people-friendly. Because only in this hut of the untouchable, everybody can have access to that specific hut, wherein even animals are living inside the house. The tribe, the Dalit lives inside the hut, a one room thatched roofed hut. He sleeps. Close to him sleeps his dog, his cat, and his chick, and then his cattle. Everything lives together in amity, in mutually complementing each other. So this kind of very eco-friendly, nature-friendly, non-exploitative, because the dog doesn't exploit the man and the man doesn't exploit the cattle. So this kind of a cycle, a very meaningful, nature-oriented life, one could find only in the hut of an untouchable. And finally, when he leaves the hut of the untouchable, he was asking the untouchable, "What do you want? Because I love the way you live. I have lived in all these five categories, and I love only your way of life, your style of living, your very nature-friendly life. So I want to gift you something before I leave India." To the shock of the readers, to the shock of everybody, this specific person was asking for a gift, which is nothing but the smoking pipe of the French man, the traveler. And he was rather shocked. "Why do you want this smoking pipe, which is used by me?" Then the untouchable says, no, sir. In this nation, which treats me as a human shit, nobody touches me in this context. You are smoking your pipe and sharing it with me. The pipes which were touched by my lips were equally shared by was equally shared by your lips. So this kind of a smoking pipe is not just a smoking pipe for me. This is an icon. This is an icon for liberation. This is an icon of equality in my perspective. So I just want this smoking pipe, and I just want to preserve it in my hut, because it is a symbol of equality. It is a symbol of fraternity. It is a symbol of brotherhood, universal brotherhood. So this specific text is a very forerunning text, and this specific text is one of the pioneering texts in the whole world, I would say, which talks about the very excruciating, very mischievous, very poisonous division of labor in India. In fact, Karl Marx was telling there is no division of labor in India, but division of laborers in India. And then in this specific context, Karl Marx went on to say in his kind of series of writings about India in the Tribune, where he records India as a fossilized state. It is a fossilized state. India is a fossil kind of social state India is having, which is never changing, and it is not adaptive to any kind of changes. This is a very important thing which I would like to highlight and focus on when Karl Marx, like a revolutionary socio-political figure, was referring to India as a fossilized state. So it will never entertain any kind of revolutionary changes in its social fabric, because any kind of trivial change in the social fabric will empower the marginalized sections of the society. So this is a very serious kind of a problem with which Indian society suffers a lot, and even today people are not ready to recognize that specific the evil called caste system, which is sanctified in the Hindu religious order. So this Indian hut is a very important classical role model text, I would say. So starting with this specific thing, Indian Dalit writers started recording their own anguish in all their writings. This is not just an Indian tendency, I would say. I want to reiterate it again. This particular tendency, or this specific emergence of invisible voices, was there throughout the world. So it was a universal phenomenon, and throughout the world, especially in the post-colonial, post-war, period, and perhaps post-colonial, in all post-colonial nations, all the historically neglected voices tried coming up. And the major finding of this specific trend or this specific attitude was when you were talking about the West versus the rest, the West versus the Orient. This specific problem was detected, and you claim that you have solved that specific crisis by including the rest into the West, or incorporating the rest also in the Western discourse. But then, what these subaltern writers tried to realize, or to try to make the other groups or the mainstream groups realize, was that in fact you leave alone the West, but within the rest, in the West versus rest discourse, within the rest, there is yet another West versus rest discourse going on, which was not noticed properly by many scholars, most of the scholars. So this West versus rest divide was very much a myth, because inside the rest, in the West versus rest discourse, within that specific rest segment, there is yet another dichotomy of elitism versus localism, or West versus rest again. So this kind of mainstream versus the margin, the peripheral voices versus the powerful, authentic voices. This specific dichotomy was detected within the rest. That is one specific major finding of these subaltern writers. So when you included Indian texts in the school of comparative writings and say that the West versus rest dichotomy was demolished, it is a myth, it is a fraud exercised on innocent humanity when you chose works, canonical text from the Indian context, but not choosing any specific text belonging to the margins of the social system. When such a question was raised, even in today's context, even in the 1990s and in the new millennium also, most of the researchers, when they start their studies on the subaltern writings or Dalit literature, very invariably they all choose Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable as a specimen text. In fact, Mulk Raj Anand was hailed as the pioneering writer who discussed the Dalit issues, especially in his novel Untouchable. But I am sorry to say that his own novel Untouchable, except the title Untouchable, I don't find any real nature or the culture or the habits or the food or the blood and vein of a manual scavenger in that specific text Untouchable, because Mulk Raj Anand is, Gandhi was tailoring that text in his ashram. Mulk Raj Anand surrendered his total text to Mahatma Gandhi, and Gandhi was going through the text, and in fact he was editing the ending of the novel, by which Baka, the manual scavenger, was transformed into or converted into a Gandhian. And he was jokingly, and he was teasing Mulk Raj Anand by saying, your Baka, the manual scavenger, doesn't look like a manual scavenger, but he sounds like a Bloomsbury intellectual. And he was made to play hockey, cricket, and all such stuff. And you can't find this specific stuff in the authentic Dalit writings. I just reproduce an important text, Om Prakash Valmiki's text, where his mother was found following a cattle, and she was following the buffaloes, and she was trying to collect the cow dungs and the dungs of the buffaloes, and she brings all those collected accumulated dung to her house. She puts it in a barrel, right? She segregates the undigested grains from that specific cow dung. Then she dries it up and prepares a gruel for her kids. This kind of an excruciating, unimaginable way of living, abject poverty with which Dalits are suffering in India, even today. I'm not talking about the scenario in the 1960s, 70s, or in the pre-independent India. I'm talking about a globalized, I'm talking about the nation which propagates all kinds of online classes, online webinars, very ironically, still people are following cow dung and segregating undigested grains from that, and they are preparing their food for their kids. Another manual scavenger was writing about, narrating her own micro narrative, her own micro experiences, the invisible experiences. She was picking up the fecal waste in the railway tracks in a bamboo basket. She was carrying human shit on her head in a bamboo basket, and she narrates it by saying, in a rainy season, it is much more excruciating because the human shit gets diluted and drips over my face through the gaps in the bamboo basket, and I carry it because the nation says that it is my birth-based duty, so I carry it with that kind of a devotion. I do that duty, and then with the same responsibility, I carry somebody else's human shit. I clean this nation. When I go back home, I clean myself, I wash myself, and I cook and serve food to my kids. I'm reminded that I'm not feeding my children with food, but with human shit. This kind of an unimaginable, very, very, very humiliating experiences. The other, I'm not trying to blame Mulkraj Anand that he has betrayed the Dalit, but I just want to say that when somebody else who is not directly involved in the whole process of manual scavenging, trying to record their experiences, it will be a romanticized, a rather patronizing attitude is what we find in Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable, where he converts very, very systematically, very conveniently, he converts a manual scavenger into Gandhian. Even with today's Swachh Bharat mission and all such things, the one and only question is, if I stop defecating in open spaces, if all the Indian nationals stop defecating in open spaces but use only their toilets, it is not a solution by itself, because once the septic tank becomes full, you again require a manual scavenger to to drain your septic tank, to clean your septic tank. And when the person of the highest stature, I'm not referring to the Prime Minister of India, but the author of an important book, Sri Narendra Modi, he records that manual scavenging is a spiritual experience. I quote, manual scavenging is a spiritual experience. And if it is a spiritual experience, let us put it on rotation basis, that each community should do that kind of cleaning the nation on a rotation basis. For 3 months, one specific community; for another 3 months, the next tier. Right? Likewise, each community should clean this nation. Each community should do this kind of scavenging work. Then the whole nation will try to find out, will fund itself to find out some kind of cleaning machines to replace human beings. Centuries and centuries of discrimination that has been very much very, very on a surface level romanticized by Mulkraj Anand, which is very much a painful truth. Yet another example from the non-Dalit writer trying to talk about Dalit experiences is Indra Pathasarthi's Kuruthi Punal, the River of Blood, published by Sahitya Academy, in which Indra Pathasarthi was trying to talk about a very important, path breaking, or a very important incident which occurred in Tanjore of Tamil Nadu, Keel Venmani massacre. This Keel Venmani massacre, in which 46 landless Dalit laborers were burnt alive in a hut called the Ramaya's hut. It is in fact made into a documentary, the Ramaya's hut. You can watch it when you are really interested in. And if you type Keel Venmani, you will get it in all kinds of in Wikipedia and all other sources. In Keel Venmani, these 46 Dalit landless laborers were burnt alive for asking for one more vessel of paddy. And this one more vessel of paddy, they were unpaid laborers, and they were asking for just one more paddy, a bowl of paddy, for which 46 Dalit landless laborers were burnt alive. And this novel, The River of Blood, is based on that specific novel, wherein the writer was not really faithful to the real incident which struck the northern part of Tamil Nadu. Wherein he was giving a psychoanalytical dimension to this to this incident, and he was trying to narrate the whole incident. He was trying to distort the whole history of that specific incident. For a writer of such stature, it is really very, very, very bad on his part to give a psychoanalytical ending to a novel which is socially relevant and socially powerful. So this kind of injustice has been meted out to the Dalit experiences, and hence Dalit writers themselves started taking up the art of writing, and even otherwise, all forms of writings, you can say, are originally the asset and the products of the productive classes. In India, you see any writer, any prominent writers throughout the world, writing is part of the larger productive process. That is why Karl Marx was keeping it as part of the superstructure. Any writing, any thematic writing, any creative writing, any writing for that matter should emerge and can emerge only from the larger productive process. Only in India, all forms of human experiences are recorded by writers who do not belong to the productive classes, who are not directly involved in the whole productive processes. So in India, it is very ironical that the non-productive community monopolizes all forms of writings, which is a shame on the whole Indian literary landscape. So resisting this specific hegemonic discourse, instead of somebody stepping in to represent the marginalized people, Dalits themselves started representing their communities' collective sufferings. So this is again, I tell you, this was taking place throughout the world. When the romantic poets were talking about heard melodies are sweet, but unheard, those unheard are sweeter. This specific unheard is the beginning of the subaltern revolution. This specific unheard, which is sweeter, is the very base of subaltern writings, is the very base of Dalit writings. Similarly, when this is the aesthetic of a literary field, you can talk about the field of sciences. Scientists are no more interested in the atomic sciences. They have started talking about the subatomic particles. So the sub is very, very important because sub is subaltern atomic particles. And in the field of histories also, macro histories are not important. Official, authentic, the giant narratives are not important now. Or they are not the only sources of histories, because history is no more. We have only histories. It is not singular but plural, it is multiple. Then comes the subaltern historiography, and sub-histories are much more important than the giant histories. And even in the field of psychology, the Freudian psychology was as much important as yeast to bread in the 20th century. And his own concept of subconsciousness proves that consciousness is not as important as subconsciousness, and subconsciousness is more important than consciousness. This is a trend, and this is an attitude, and this is a period in which all kinds of unheard melodies, subconsciousness, subatomic studies, and sub-histories, all these sub-things are coming up, and these micro-narratives are to be acknowledged. These micro-narratives are to be acknowledged, and the Indian writers taking up a privileged position and trying to patronize the invisible voices. One should not allow, one cannot allow. I don't mean to say that nobody else should write about the Dalits. The point is, when somebody else writes about the Dalits, there should be minimum ethics in that. we use a very significant term starting with the Tirukural in Tamil, Aram, which means ethics. That ethics is not there in any field today. I give a very random example. Even when people are talking about post-truth era, when media creates truth, it doesn't even distort some kind of events and constructs its truth. It creates truth. It repeatedly tells something that never existed and make people believe that it is truth. So when truth is manufactured and disseminated, I would like to recollect my own experiences in many rural landscapes where we had a system in all villages. Even today, in many rural areas, you may have such a system of passing on the information, passing on news, the news of the passing away of somebody, the death of somebody, all these death related news, and of course other temple festival related news, such news, right, such an information was passed on to all neighboring villages using a single individual. A person will go in his he will go to all villages in his bicycle. He will ride his bicycle. He'll visit 110 villages. He'll meet 100 villages, and he'll pass on the death of somebody. What is so great in that? Something is very much great in that, because the whole village trusts an individual, and he is the one who informs. He passes on exact information to all these 100 families. So and so's son passed away. That information is passed on to 100 families with utmost sincerity and honesty. So what is great in it? The greatness of one individual going across and passing on a news is the very base is truth. The very base is truth. He had that responsibility of carrying news across. Now, where is that ethic? In our own media, both print and visual media, can anyone suggest one specific newspaper or a journal or any form of web resource which is very much honestly carrying truth or truths? This specific, in fact, I would say Dalits were the original owners of media in the pre-print culture times. They were the carriers of news. Nobody else rode bicycles to pass on certain news of the death or of temple festivals to any other communities. Not only in India, throughout the world. When it got commercialized, when it got into the hands of capitalists, there was competition, and each media started its own weaving of tales. One incident, but 10 different versions. This was not there when Dalits were carrying news. This is just an example from the media field. In the literature also it happens. So many Dalit intellectuals, the new class among the Dalits, the little awakened, enlightened Dalits, they started writing their own experiences much more powerfully in their regional languages. So in the Indian context, when their versions were not available in English, there was a problem in reaching the mainstream. So when Tamil writers like Bama, Pumani, Imayam, Sivagami, all these writers were writing much more powerful writings than all other the so-called canonical Indian writers in English. They couldn't reach the common readers because of their regional languages. But then, thanks to the revolution in the translation studies field, now most of their writings are available in English. And now there is an awakening in common readers that so far what we have been reading in the name of Indian writings in English, which mostly talked about, if it is Indian women's writing in English, they all talked about at least 70% of Indian women's writing in English discussed and dealt only with the Indian women's diasporic experiences. The 3% Indian population which left India, I'm strongly using the word they fled India, because they believed that their own opportunities were taken by or grabbed by the marginalized sections. They left India, they fled India, but they never went to any poor nations or poorer nations. They all got settled in all developed nations like the US, Canada, Australia. You go to Australia, Canada, US, UK, you find all these diasporic Indian elites who sat there and wrote all kinds of their Indian experiences. When somebody leaves India out of utter disappointment and disillusionment and settles very happily in an air-conditioned chamber in a much pleasant weather, why do you sit there in an air-conditioned chamber and think about or long about the pani puri in the Mumbai streets? You shouldn't have left India, or you should have married a pani puri wala and taken him to your place to prepare you pani puris. It is this kind of unnecessary longings, this kind of unnecessary what you call the third generation diasporic experiences are really not the original problems of India. That is where I'm coming. You are free to write anything about yourself and your experiences, but who gave you the right to project that specific problem of longing for one's soil, longing for one's nation as an Indian problem? The whole Indian problem is not that. 16,000 farmers commit suicide in India on an average for the last 15 years. Nobody seriously talks about it. There have been a lot of rape. Thousands and thousands of Dalit and tribal women were raped in broad daylight in most of the Indian villages, and they were paraded naked in most of the Indian villages. Where were the voices that arose in the backdrop of the Delhi gang rape incident? Where were these voices when, for centuries, for at least for the last 1 century, for the last post-independent India at least, where were these voices when thousands and thousands of women were raped brutally by the so-called upper caste men, the upper caste patriarchy? These specific voices were very much muffled, and the original sufferer could not express his or her own experience to the common readers. That was really solved. That space was really got thanks to the centenary celebration of Ambedkar, and also to the parallel Renaissance movement and the realization of that counter Renaissance movement, starting with Jyotiba Phule, Ayotidas Pandidar, Rettai Srinivasan, M.C. Raja, Narayan Guru of Kerala. All these social revolutionaries, they started resisting the hegemonic structures of India's social order and India's intelligentsia. So this specific expression of the collective sufferings, of the collective anguish of the Dalits. This last, I give you one example from K.A. Gunasekaran's The Scapegoats, Bali Ardugan, which is a very powerful text in the theatre of the oppressed in India, where he talks about the problem of a village. In a village, the village didn't receive substantial rains. There was monsoon failure, and the whole village consulted an astrologer, a priest, and the priest predicted and suggested an expiation measure that a Dalit person should be sacrificed. Human sacrifice should be there to bring down rains. And the whole village picks up one specific Dalit. And when the ordeal was very much fulfilled, just a minute before, that specific Dalit man, he was asking a serious question. You want any Dalit to be sacrificed or only me? And the village says, no, anybody. Then he says, I am not willing to be sacrificed for this cause. Rather, my wife is a very faithful wife to me, and she is ready to sacrifice her life to protect me. Please sacrifice her and get rains. This is how all Dalit texts are inherently very much feminist oriented as well. Because I always believe that the relationship between a black man and black women, the relationship between a Dalit man and a Dalit woman is not as exactly hierarchy oriented or exploitation oriented as you find the relationship between a white man and a white woman, an upper caste man and an upper caste woman. In fact, women in the Dalit communities are exercising and getting much more freedom than their upper caste counterparts. And this is why there is no dowry harassment related issues, there is no widowhood issues, there is no issue of sati, torturing the head of widow and cornering her in your house by compelling her to wear white sarees or visibly marking her identity as a widow. Such issues are not prevalent in the Dalit communities or in any tribal communities. There is no issue of the extramarital relationships or widow remarriage. Nothing of that sort. In fact, it entertains and it celebrates life than any other cultures and any other communities. So this specific, I'm not trying to assert that Dalit culture or tribal culture or indigenous culture is better than or is, I'm not trying to endorse such things. I'm trying to say that their lifestyle, their cultures are much more nature friendly, more importantly, non-exploitative. So such a non-exploitative culture is trying to record its own experiences. It will certainly lead to the creation of what the seminar's title, the webinar's title tries for, equality in an unequal social setup like India. So this specific, in a nation which experienced more than 150 honor killings, reported honor killings in the last 1 year itself, 2019 itself. This specific, killing somebody because somebody is in love with somebody. In the West, love is something very much casual, and it is a sign. It's a sign of human passion and compassion. Only in India, when a daughter comes and informs the parent, "I'm in love with somebody," it was seriously viewed as a blasphemous crime, and that girl is murdered or the boy is murdered. So, in a land of honor killings, in a land of homicides, in a land of gang rapes, in a land of women being paraded naked, there are much more issues, more excruciating, painful issues are in the air to be written, to be recorded, and proliferated to the whole world to understand, to realize how discriminatory this specific social system is, thereby liberating, thereby rescuing the humanity. So the Dalit literature's whole objective is to liberate humanity and celebrating the differences. There need not be any homogenization of cultures. One India, one food, one dress is something which is violating of, it is a clear violation of our very basic tenets of humanity. So let us all first expect the differences. Let us all try to respect the differences, learn to respect the differences, and let us all celebrate such differences. You and I need not think the same way, the same manner. We need not dress the same way. We need not eat the same material which we eat. Let us celebrate the differences. With these words, let me wind up my session on Dalit writing, resisting the hegemonic discourses. Thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity, my dear Aslam.
Thank you, sir, for such a scholarly speech, lecture. Your lecture definitely will be very useful for research scholars because you have highlighted or mentioned commonalities among Dalit writings, subaltern studies, Marxist philosophy, then African marginalized people, then Afro-American. I mean, a wide range of areas you have covered in your lecture. Definitely, it will be useful for participants and particularly research scholars. Sir, people are asking question. If you give me permission, then I will read the question of
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please.
First question, Anam. She is a student of, she was a student of Central University of Jharkhand. Now she is pursuing her PhD from IFLU. My question to you, sir, first, she has given a greeting. Uh, Mark, sir, you have enriched my knowledge, right? Loved it. Now, question is, when we look at the hut of the untouchable as the most untouchable space, a space of brotherhood, how do we negotiate the application of elitist theory in such human literature? Do we need a more organic, experiential kind of theory to make sense of this writing that are born out of the soil?
Yeah. Of course, with the elitist theories, even the subaltern historiographic theories are not adequate enough to read and to analyze such writings from the soil as she records. There is a need for Dalit aesthetic, and towards the Dalit aesthetic by Sharan Kumar Limbale's a work which is worth reading to understand what kind of, in fact, he has tried propounding a theory, but as far as my knowledge is concerned, or in my own personal opinion, there is no need for any specific tool to understand and to analyze the works from the soil, to read the works from the indigenous communities, because it is damn simple, it is uncomplicated, it is very much as it is nature friendly, it should be reader friendly as well. So I don't require a guide, I don't require a mode, I don't require a tool or a theory to get into the text of a fellow human being talking about equality, because it doesn't require a tool at all anyhow. If you specifically as a researcher, if somebody asks you which theory you have used, which has become the question of the hour nowadays, you can perhaps use the theory of the, towards the Dalit aesthetic by Sharan Kumar Limbale. Or even you can talk about Arendt's the politics of pity, where people are talking about the patronizing attitude of others. In Tamil we say this Ayyo Pavam attitude. Seeing somebody and pitying them, sympathizing them, but there is no empathy at all. So this kind of sympathizing with somebody and leaving the forgetting the matter, as per your convenience, which is really not a useful exercise at all.
Okay, she has written a thanks for Mark, sir. Now, next question from Yes. He carries the same kind of question. He is talking about another yardstick. Good morning, sir. I'm Yash Raj. Sir, Dalit writers and critics assert that we cannot evaluate or interpret a Dalit text from the existing literary theories. The reasons are quite obvious. My question is whether Dalit literary theory is present or not to evaluate the same, as you have mentioned in previous, your answer. This is asking about a new yardstick. Now, my next question from Parijat Goswami. In the feminist front, do you think that Dalit patriarchy is non-existent? Malika Aman Sheikh talks about this in her autobiography, I Want to Destroy Myself, translated by Jerry Pinto. So,
No, I don't really, want to say that Dalit patriarchy never existed. Dalit patriarchy existed. That is why there is a cry for a separate segment called Dalit feminism. Dalit feminism emerged because the emergence of Dalit feminism recognizes the existence of Dalit patriarchy. It's very simple. But my point is, the sufferings and the untold miseries, the miseries of women among the upper caste are very much much more, much more powerful, much more excruciating than that of the lower caste women. That is where I'm coming, because when you discuss the problem of sati, the problem of widowhood, the problem of morality, you can't see such issues very much prominently discussed in the Dalit communities, among the Dalit communities. But I don't mean to say that there is absolutely no enslavery among the Dalit communities. I don't say that. There is a need for Dalit feminism, but then this Dalit feminism itself emerged because there is no space for the Dalit women's experiences in the elite feminist discourse. When you talk about Indian mainstream feminism, no Indian mainstream feminists ever discussed the unique problems of Dalit women, because for them their problem is something on a surface level, that is something with regard to their own cultures. I mean to say that I'm not trying to trivialize their problems, but the point is, when you are trying to highlight your own problems and you fail to represent the problems of Dalit women, there was a need for the emergence of Dalit feminism. So I won't say Dalit patriarchy never existed, but Dalit patriarchy was also a victim of the upper caste patriarchy, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. This is question from Avinash, Ankit Avinash from Jagjiwan College, Ara. My question is that after having article 14, 15, 17 and 46 also, discrimination is going on a very large scale. Here people vote also because the representative belongs to their caste. Okay, so sir, I want to ask that why after having so many articles, discrimination is going on, what steps should we take to quit this forever? And yeah, this is question.
Yeah, it's very simple, because laws alone cannot prevent, or laws alone cannot prevent atrocities against Dalits or women or tribals. The lawmakers can only draft certain things, and it will be only in the papers, like white tigers. But the real state machinery, for example, when 100 rape cases are there against, rape of Dalit women were reported. In these rapes, most of the rapes happened in the or indirectly, invisibly encouraged by the state machinery. So when there is an atrocity against the Dalits or Dalit neighborhood, police also are mute spectators in such issues, and we are nowadays, with the advent of social media and other things, how the police machinery itself is very much complicing with the dominant caste members in creating a kind of fear psychosis in the minds of Dalits. So the state is not very much in favor of implementing certain things, very, very point blank. And unless there is a change in the human attitude, you cannot find any change merely with laws, policies, and other things. Persons should change, because you just see the matrimonial columns. Everybody wants their own caste members as partners above all other qualifications. So it won't change. Individuals should change.
Yes, sir. Uh, I'll ask two questions, and that will be final. Uh, I mean, people have written a lot of questions. That shows the inquisitiveness of participants, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Haris Usmani, that's what I mean between present regime, the voice, and literary activities, much less subaltern thinkers. And let me repeat it. Yeah, that's what I mean between present regime, the voice, and literary activities, much less subaltern thinkers and activities are suppressed. Brahmanical mindset at its prime. Perhaps he has given me another question I'm not able to connect. Yeah, it's true that progressive thinker often quotes Marx to assert their views. But what is happening to subaltern history writer like Ramchandra Guha? So he is and the present regime. So he is asking your uh, take and critique over the present regime and the situation that with Dr. Ramchandra Guha.
Yeah, I got the question. It's a very interesting political question.
Yeah, but
I didn't discuss it because I know you have the program gave me 45 minutes and I have exceeded it. So I didn't include that in my speech, but I want to respond to this question. This specific, I don't really understand whether he is referring to Ranajit Guha, the subaltern historiographer, or the present Ramachandra Guha, because there is a Ramachandra Guha as well who is writing nowadays.
oh yes,
And in both their cases, I answer for both. In these historiographers, the Marxist historiography of India, the left-wing historiography of India, the sad state of affairs with the Marxists of India or Marxist thinkers, Marxist intellectuals of India is that both in the context of West Bengal and Kerala, Marxism, when it came to India, was immediately assimilated by the elitist Brahminical thinkers. That is one reason why the Basus, the Bhattacharyas, and all the upper caste Brahminical progressive intellectuals, they immediately owned and monopolized Karl Marx and his theories. That is one reason why most of the Marxists in both these spaces are almost capitalist only, and even the Marxist parties are owning corporate houses and giant industries and even news units, so press units. So this kind of class alone matters for them attitude is an injustice done to the millions and millions of Dalits of India, because they never understood, or they pretend not to have understood the real issue, the caste question of Dalits as real caste question, because they very much deliberately refuse to include the question of caste in their whole discourse. So for them, class alone matters, and so they simply neglected the caste question, and one should understand that in India, class differences alone doesn't matter, and economic equality doesn't guarantee social equality in India. I sum up this way: economic mobility does not guarantee any social superiority or social equality in India. You may become the president of India, still you are referred to as the Dalit president of India. So Marxists failed in that specific front.
true, true. Sir, last question uh, from Dr. Vandana Singh. What do we call those Dalits who find a center for themselves, who hold high position in the society, segregate their own kith and kin because they wish to segregate their identity from those who stand on the margin? Don't we call or don't we all need to work at grassroots level? Is only higher caste discriminating? Sir, your analysis about it.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true that now there is a mass migration from the subaltern grassroots to the elite centers, and she has signaled that specific transition of most of the Dalit intellectuals and Dalit leaders, trying to turn their political direction to the power center or to the elite power center. It's very much true, but it is not only in the Dalit communities. It is in every community that the a little socially mobilized, even among Muslims, it happens. I could find, progressive Muslims finding a space in the right wing political sphere. So it is everywhere, and one who is very much self-centered will, in order to climb up in the political sphere, may sacrifice their ideologies. This happens in the Dalit landscape as well, which is again a sorry state of affairs.
Okay. Now, thank you, sir. There are 48 questions, so I won't ask. So,
You can forward them to me. I will respond to them.
yes, yes, and I will share your video
Yeah, sure.
to you, and particularly those research scholars who are interested to gain informations from you and can find out code text and context from your present lecture. I will forward to them also. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Do visit to our university, Veer University. Right. You are welcome, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to invite a young eminent teacher of sociology, Dr. K.M. Jagjiwan, sir. Sir, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I was muted by host, so thank you.
All right. Actually, technically, I'm not very sound, so I was searching you with it. Okay, so now I would like to invite this eminent teacher of sociology, K.M. Jagjiwan, sir, to address the August gathering. But before that, I would like to read your bio note. Dr. K.M. Jagjiwan, sir, teaches in the Department of Sociology, and he is also associate faculty at the Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Hyderabad. Before joining Manu, he also taught for few years in the Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He attained initial degrees in sociology from Jamia Millia Islamia, MPhil Social Medicine and Community Health from JNU, PhD in Sociology from Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. Apart from his research paper and chapters in edited volume, a few of his book publication includes Muslims of India, Exclusionary Process and Inclusionary Measures, editors by Manak Publication, Delhi 2012, Dimension of Social Exclusion and Ethnographic Exploration by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, UK 2009, Sociology of Health in a Dalit Community, Access of Exclusion by CSP 2012. Presently, he is working in 3 upcoming manuscripts: Communalism in India, Social, Historical and Legal Perspective, co-authors Vineet Mathur and Narendra Nagarwal. Reading Minorities in India, Forms and Perspective, Jaipur Rawat Publication. Illness and Health, Sociological Narratives of Dalits, communicated to Sage Publication. Recently, he was selected to United States Exchange Program on International Visitors Leadership Program in November 2019, sponsored by Department of State, United States, to attend multiple programs in various states of USA. In his over 1.5 decades of teaching and research at central universities, Jagjiwan sir has also been associated with civil society organization working on minorities, uh, sanitation workers' rights and Dalits, and gender politics, and has been founding member of a few organizations. He is also actively engaged a national convener research committee on minority studies of Indian Sociological Society, New Delhi. With this brief note, I request you, Jagjiwan sir, to please address this August gathering. Dr. Khwaja Muhammad Jagjiwan sir, titled Sociological Nuances in Dalit Literature. Sir, your writing section and domain is very strong. And it is said that those who write, they shine like a sun. Right. Thank you, sir. So please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aslam. Good morning to everyone who have been patiently participating in this 2 days national, I would say not webinar, but discussion, because you have good number of questions, very relevant to the conference. Uh, Let me show my pleasure to be here for two reasons. One, that just because somebody who is working in a college remote part of the country where historically it is very significant, but the kind of quest locating discussions in the area of Dalit literature, talking on gender, aesthetic, art, and activism is applaudable, and for that I must also place my pleasure and congratulations to the Vice Chancellor of the university, Professor Devi Prasad Tiwari. I could witness his wishes yesterday morning. Uh, Without doubt, the principal of the college, Professor Jawaharlal, is also, I believe, that must be an important instrument behind giving permissions and encouragement to young teachers in a college to organize such programs. So I congratulate the entire team. In fact, Aslam Parvez and his co-joint convener, Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Bharti. Second important reason is that the college which is organizing is historically named by Jagjiwan Ram, who was one of the very eminent politicians. As a politician, everyone, all of us know him. But then if we read his youth days activism, academic activism, which is very appreciable. And in fact, there is a need to organize, and you must have done some discussion on Jagjiwan Ram, that, how Jagjiwan Ram fought for the Dalit empowerment, Dalit emancipations, and largely the political participation that Dalit should have. So this is very important for this college, that you could organize such a program during the midst of COVID-19, having brought of people from across the country on varieties of areas they spoke. And I'm happy that I'm perhaps the last speaker in the panel, which gave me chance to listen all of them. And every talk here today was very different and diverse, with great enrichment of knowledge. So thank you, Dr. Aslam, for having me here this morning. And I'm really blessed that I could talk to people who are not from my background, largely from languages and literature or humanities as a whole. I don't know, because I am one odd man out here as a student of sociology, but my interest goes down in how we locate sociology in the literature, which is very important, and the entire gamut of literature which is available here, which we have in the domain of research, is largely, I see, more sociological, and whether we analyze from different perspectives, but the literature which is there is very important to us. So I thought, let me quickly, share my brief understanding, and my understanding and interest goes down to my primary field work. I did my first ethnographic field work on a Dalit community in India, and then they were largely not Dalit, but Dalits among Dalits, that I may be referring in between about them. Basically, I worked on manual scavenger. That was my PhD work initially as an ethnographic study. But gradually, why Dalit is important to all of us, and they should be considered much more important, is because the kind of writings we have on one of the theme is very diverse, and you may find that people are having it. I'll be quickly also sharing few slides just to make it more connecting, because usually I'm not much used to sharing, much used to have PowerPoint, but today I thought, since we are connecting from different corners, so this will be, interesting to share these slides, and that will help us to generate a discussion here. The importance of this talk is also because it is one of the important area where not only Dalits, but then Dalits across the country, across the globe, they have discussed about. And let me begin with this anecdote that some of us must have read or seen the writing of Isabel, which was also got Pulitzer Prize in last year. I mean, in fact, this preceding year. And if you remember how this book on caste, which was written by an American, gives worldwide discussion again and brings back the discussion of caste in India, and then entire notion of that whether black lives or the caste discrimination in India or black discrimination in American context is very important. And if you quickly see here the interview which when Indra Nuyu, all of us are aware of, she says that her family, and where she mentioned that was a good conservative Brahmin family, deeply steeped in learning and education. That was the only focus. The expectation was you would get a minimum master's degree. It was in a context how she was briefing her, background. But coming back to the question of like Isabel, when she mentions that how caste is important, even in diasporic communities where caste is not only as an identity, but then kind of celebration somebody has in diasporic community, that you celebrate your caste and in different ways. And we have a lot of writings into that. In fact, Hollywood, some of the important actors also denounce later that we do not believe into caste, but then it generated a lot of discussion in American society, academia as a whole. So when we say that caste, you have liberal discourse on the issues of caste, that caste has gradually gone down, and it is not caste, but basically class is more important. And you must be aware, and then we know that how Professor Marx discusses in the context of caste, and then how class notion is demystified when you talk of Dalit literature in India. It is important to look at that Dalit literature, what we call Dalit literature written by Dalit writers, whether male or female, that we'll be discussing in a while, is basically demystifies the notion of romanticizing caste in different contexts. And we know that when we talk of Dalit literature, we go back to the briefly historical writings in 50s, 60s, when Dalit literature emerged in Maharashtra, when you have Dalit Panthers movement giving a way forward for those who were scattered, who were broken down, who were in different pockets of Marathi region. We had people who were writing about their life experiences, the narratives of individuals. The individual experiences were written in pieces, stories, and largely in regional languages, with what we see in Marathi. It is only in 1970 when you see, and these broken different pieces of stories on the basis of experiences and narratives basically paved the way for Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that he when he started working, he had a ground. He had people who were already engaged into the field. He had people who were already writing a lot on Dalit's life and in their aspirations for the emancipations. So if you see how the role played by Janta, Prabhuddha Bharat or Mukh Nayak, we all of us feel that these are some publications which were bringing regular stories in the name of experiences through poems about the untouchability, and you do not have Dalit at the time. The notion of Dalits are either untouchables or ex-untouchables, and largely the Gandhian, the nationalist, the people who were engaged in national movement, they also use them as Harijan. And we all have read about how Ambedkar contested, and many Ambedkarites have contested the notion of Harijan, why it was used. So that makes very important to us. Now, Dalit literature is not only what we say that it is a representation of Dalit's life experiences, but it is also very, very creative and intellectual expressions, which is there in regional languages, later transform into global language, which we say in English. But these fantastic expression of Dalit's life we find in various literary genres, and in people from literary background, they have been examining these literature in the novels, in the form of novelists. But what I consider here is basically that Dalit literature is a primary social and human document. It's a documentation of a life in terms of their primary observations, primary experiences, where it deals with people who have socially and economically been exploited, and not for a day or months, but centuries, hundreds of years in the country. So the best here we find that there is a good sign of social equality slowly entering into India by the kind of literature it has brought in, and that is the reason we have started from 1970s onward talking of Dalit literature. And in Dalit literature, when somebody says that it appears to be a perspective, paradigm shift from the literary arts and aesthetic which is there in a literature, the enriched literature of the world or country like India. But Dalit literature slightly shift away, and it is basically a protest against the social structure. It's a rejection of those social reality, and a rejection of the crude reality that has for thousands of years created problem for the people who lived as the life of Dalits. In fact, many of us remember that recently there were also kind of order or notifications we have that we should not use the word Dalit. The government, the state machinery or governance as a whole should use them, those Dalits as scheduled caste, which is written in the Constitution of India. But Dalit writers and Dalit academy as a whole have rejected this notion, because the nomenclature what we say Dalit represents a vast period of struggle and sacrifices which represent the in fact life history of Dalits in India. So when we use the uses of the term is very important. The uses and how we use those concepts, the contextualization also gets changed. So when we say Dalit, it brings a lot of meaning, historical meaning, and then historical struggle Dalit writer and authors who have represented a life of Dalits in India. But when we say scheduled caste, it is somewhere it goes down in our mind that it is basically, we talk of the numerical strength, the data, statistical figure which is there available in the different documents of the country. So Dalit writing, unlike black literature, is not much more militant, but it has much more grounded, empirically true, primarily observed and lived experiences, and it has gradually emerged as an all India phenomena. And this is very important. If you see, there is very interesting piece written by Satyanarayan and Susi Tharo. Both of them are in IFLU. So Susi Tharo, they say that Dalit writing becomes an all India phenomena, and the caste question, the kind of reassessment it does is very important. It resists the reduction of caste to class or to non-Brahminism, and vividly describes and analyzes the contemporary workings of caste power. What we drive here, and I also, student of sociology, understand that there were great attempt, and still it is there in different writings, that caste is not much significant in terms of understanding social inequality, but it is more of class, and that leads to understand the social structure. But it is empirically never true to understand Indian society from the lens of class, but it is always caste, either as an insider or we locate them as an outsider. I am not talking much about the early Dalit writers, but I could see some of the writing. If you find, and you have papers on Chennaya, who was 11th century considered to be a poet, and he wrote a lot of poetry about the life of Dalits who survived and lived in the period of 11th century. So these are important to understand. But Anna Bhava Sathe is one important person whose novels were gradually translated in different pieces, and then in 1961, when his novels got short stories are very important. I, in fact, I'm illiterate in terms of Marathi writing, but when we read English, even stories, which is experiential, it makes a lot of sense to us. And that's what I understand, that Marathi literature, which moves from one generation to another generations through the means of language. So Marathi, when it emerges into the world of English, it is also an area which is emancipating the largest number of Dalits across the country. And it gives us a sense that when we read, if you see the left side, which I'm talking about, why I had concealed my caste, book written by Babura Bagul, or Namdev Dasal, who was, all of us are aware of, the founder of the Dalit Panther movement in Maharashtra, and a couple of those individuals who were very important there, they played very important role. But in 1950 and 60s, the Ambedkarite movement also started emerging in Maharashtra, and that is the reason when Sathe's work were translated into English by Vinay Apte. He was, in fact, Vinay Apte was also an actor, is an actor. I don't know whether it's alive or not, but there is also a documentary made by him, and that was the momentum that people found that, okay, how Dalit lives in the social order of Indian society. So the anthology of Mulk Raj Anand, if somebody reads that, an anthology of Dalit literature is very significant work. And later when Orient Hyderabad, publisher house, they also published one volume by Arjun Dangle, Poison Bread. These are the stories which brought a lot of literature in depth, the primary in depth to the life of Dalits in India. Largely, these were in the context of Maharashtra. Maharashtra, I say the region because they were originally written in Marathi. So these voices questions what they do. These voices, they basically questions the in fact institutions and ideologies that have placed largest number of population in India at the ground, at the very margin of the, and this is where, as when we locate the notion of social exclusion, helps us to understand that caste is not only an institutions, but it is kind of based on an ideology which creates different institution in the society. So caste doesn't play directly a role, but this play the existence of caste is largely from different institutions in the form of marriage, in the form of religion, in the form of family, kinship, and then social interactions, and then the last religion as an institution. So caste appears to be a tool. When we see in medical sciences, the diabetes is not one of the an illness, but basically it is a reason for several illnesses which has chances to come in a body. So similarly, in 60s and 70s, people felt that there is a need to assert about Dalit identity, to place a different ideology, to place a different asserting ideology in the domain of academia and civil society. And then in 60s, 70s, you have Phule Ambedkarite movement taking place in not only in Maharashtra, gradually coming down to southern parts of the country where I'm located, and that makes that Tamil Dalit writers, or Telugu Dalit writers, Kannadiga Dalit writers, they wrote a lot on the life of Dalits in India, in their own regions. If you see in 1888, there is one historical name, that Anare Dosh Pariharak Mandal. It is considered to be first Dalit writing by Valankar, where the question of identity and struggle put forth in the domain, public domain, was brought in, and he was considered a very important person in that way. So as I'll not talk much on this, but conceptually yesterday we discussed that Dalits are basically, but what I wanted to say, that Dalit are not only broken down or oppressed, because this is the Marathi word. What I am trying to also understand here, that there are people who experiences similar, almost similar, like features in their life, and people who are from the backward communities, not only what we say quote unquote scheduled caste, but Dalit people. There are people who have written that Dalits are not only scheduled caste, but largely those also who have been experiencing caste discrimination in the society. So the backward communities, the Sudra, what we say, the backward classes in the country. And in that context, the work of Kanchailaya is also to be mentioned, that Kanchailaya says that Bahujan, Dalit and Bahujan are one homogeneous group, which comprises one with the notion that they experience a similar life in the society. What Professor Marx was today just talking, that the notion of productions, social productions, or production as a whole in Marxian perspective, the producers are not the recipients in Indian society. The producers of food, the producers of meat, the producers of everything, whatever you produce in Indian economy, is largely from the Dalit Bahujans, not from the other small minorities in terms of the caste structure. So it is important to understand that Dalits is not only that Dalit is talking about one or a few number of caste within the category, a constitutional category of scheduled caste, but it also represents the sentiments, the aspirations of those who also experiences similar experiences. Now, Dalit, there is second issue which we need to understand, as conceptually we need to be clear, that Dalit we consider as one nomenclature which represents the large number of various caste within one category. So there is a notion that we need to deconstruct, that Dalits should not be considered as a homogeneous group. This may be a term, a conceptual understanding, but the understanding of Dalit would be more interesting and examining scientifically when we look at Dalit from the eyes of caste, from the lenses of caste. So that is important, and that is the reason that when you talk of Dalit, you have number of caste-based identity within the category of Dalit. And generally we are carried away by the understanding of caste in all writing, social sciences writing, or any writing which is focusing caste as an important tool to understand Indian society. But how outsider, how colonials or those anthropologists who attempted to understand caste in India, they considered and thought the notion of caste in a very different context, and that is in fact one different area. But as an from the Indo-logical perspective, when we locate Dalit, we need to understand how caste operates in society. So, in terms of name, traditional occupations, common culture, relatively rigid in matters of mobility, and forming each caste, forming its own, homogeneous culture, but different from the other on the basis of their hierarchy. So that needs to be kept in mind when we talk of caste inequality to understand Dalit in India. So Dalit is not one heterogeneous or homogeneous just to say, but we need to be careful to examine when we talk of Dalit. But the association of caste with untouchability is important shift we need to have in mind, that caste is not only a concept, but it also brings a kind of religious dogma on the notion of purity and pollutions. And this is what purity and pollution, which has been much more discussed in all sociological writing if you read. I remember the moment we started as a student in undergraduate courses, we never studied Dalit life of Dalits in Indian society. We also located, Indian society from the lenses of caste, and those studies based writing on caste as an institutions are not from one perspective, locating from top to bottom. And that is the reason that the literature on caste in India itself is challenged by some of the young, young social scientists like Sharmila Regi, who recently left this world. She also challenged talking when she talks of Dalit women in the context of feminism, or Vivek Kumar's writing, if you read, he's challenging the entire notions. So what is important here is only because when you talk of taking nuances of sociology in Dalit literature, we have reflections on sufferings, pain, anxieties, the kind of continuous discrimination in social order we live into. But those who lived those experiences, the people, the communities, or the subgroups within Dalits who lived these experiences, were never seen in India, were never reflected into the academic world until it was translated into English writing. And that is the reason many more Dalit writers or female Dalit writers also are now very celebrated voices in academic world. Urmila Pawar is one of them, all of you know. So when we say that sociological nuances, let me also talk that how if you there are volumes of speeches and writings of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which is compiled by, and then it is available and published by Government of India Publication Division. Initially, it was brought in by the Maharashtra government, and then last 5 years back, Government of India took away. So Dalit is, what I say, is not a caste. It is a symbol of change. It is a symbol of change, bringing emancipations, bringing perhaps aspirations for a revolutions to translate the life of marginalized into a life of normal being. No, so it means that the kind of exploited group we had, the Dalits who were oppressed economically, culturally, socially, in the name of social institution I was talking of, Dalit is not, that is the reason Dalit is not only a caste, what people say, but it is a realizations where Arjun Dangle writes about that. It is the realization of the life of Dalit, which is different on the basis of sorrows and joy, the struggle and emancipations, and these are the sociological, mature sociological point where we understand the why somebody would rebel against the social order, why somebody would not like to follow the functionalist lifestyle, which is considered to be very normal. A child who doesn't obey the directions of parents are considered disobedient, considered, anti, is not a defiant. In fact, that why do you not follow the values of the society, values of the family? But here, the entire large number of masses who belongs to the oppressed in the name of caste structure are rebellion, are doesn't want, are basically against those kind of social order. And that is the reason we have also revolutionary writing within the Dalit literature. I was reading when recently, so just 3-4 days back, let me also bring back one literature written in Urdu literature. My wife, I was talking to her that I wanted to talk on Dalit literature from sociological point of view. She says that there is a fantastic novel written in Urdu, Divyawani, and I don't know whether this is available in Hindi or not, but it was published in 2000. And Gazanfar, who is also from one of the celebrated novel writer who writes about the real, and he brings in the subaltern perspective how Bihar, the context of Dalit's life in Bihar, state of Bihar is seen. So even in not only in English literature, Marathi literature, even the best novels of the country in literature, like I talk here, the Divyawani by Gazanfar, is one of the celebrated novel which talks about the caste structure, lived caste structure in Bihar, and that makes sense to us that every literature is bringing the experiences of. So I was just talking about Sarmila Rege. She talks of caste, gender, inequality. Mostly we had seen in sociological curriculum text that caste gender inequality was not located from the point of view Dalit perspective or subaltern perspective. So when writers like or sociologists like Regi, Vivek Kumar and others brought in pieces, small pieces, it gives meaning to the kind of a study we have in universities and colleges. In fact, it is very important to locate the course curriculum of the country. Does the teaching at master's and undergraduate level talk about the experiences based writing of Dalits in India, or it is somebody else who is writing on Dalits and we are teaching that? That is the departure we have now in young sociologists, that that somebody who lived in his or her own comfort and doing a field work on Dalits experiences in a village, in a town, in a suburb, and somebody who is living his or her own life into that basti, mohalla, slum or locality or a village is important, and it is more connecting to the experiences of blacks we read in the context of race in America. So talking that becomes more important for us. Now we also have one important, very popularized and very it's considered to be very significant concept in Indian sociology, Sanskritizations. But there are certain Dalit writers who have rejected this notion, with the fact that in 12th and 13th century, when you have Bhakti movement in India, you have, when we, have some kind of comparison of Sufi movement, who that was giving larger space to people across the religious group, and largely people from the lower caste order were the disciples visiting the Sufi saints' houses, Sufi saint centers. You have Bhakti movement where some of the Dalit philosopher thinkers who thought about their life, they thought that accepting vegetarianism, putting sandalwood on their forehead, wearing sacred threads, the rituals of twice born caste, or putting much more efforts to learn priestly languages, they were important, and they tried to. So few Dalit writers did that experiment much more before freedom movement started. And if you see the name like Swami Thakkar, Lai Sagar, or Muldas Vaishya, or Moon Vitoba Raoji Pandey from Maharashtra, some of the names which is there available in literature, they tried to adopt those cultural and practices, norms and practices of the upper caste, and to show that some kind of sympathy, some kind of understanding or empathy is received by the upper caste, Brahminical social order. But that did not help, and that is the reason later we have Anare Dosh Pariharak Mandal, which is very important organizations. They published, and then they published a lot on these area, but then these writings did not help for long period of time. They tried to find some solace within living as a Dalit, but solace in the Bhakti movement, and that was considered, but that their identity did not survive for long period because that did not give them real emancipations in real crude life. Ambedkar took part in, all of us know that, Akhil Bharatiya Bahishkrit Parishad, and he criticized many of the nationalists and many of the people who were at the political efforts, doing political efforts in the national movement. And Gail Ahmed, Gawai also, they all represent a generation of leaders in favor of a model of linguistic integration, which included Sanskritic reforms, So you have departure, or there is slow movement of Dalit writers, poets, or thinker in India. Those initially got influenced from cultural norms of upper caste, locating their space and freedom within the Bhakti religion, and those roots somewhere travels until a freedom movement survives and then India gets freedom. But Dr. Ambedkar, Phule's idea on Dalit's life destroys that traditions and did not work for a long period of time. I need to bring one piece of article which is highlighted here, that Shoma Sen, when she writes that in Baby Kamle's or Urmila Pawar's, those written in Marathi. So Sen examines those two feminists, Dalit feminists, basically, kind of life narratives which construct their relations to the environment, the village they lived, and then how the living in a village shaped their thinking process in terms of bringing very, very precious piece of writings. So Dalit feminism emerged. Obviously, many people believe that Dalit feminism is still evolving. It has not become, and there are a lot to be seen from the angle of theories people say. So just I need to connect what Professor Marx was just sharing to you, that to share somebody's life experiences doesn't need a standardized theory, until unless you do not have Marxist theory or postmodern theory. It is not possible to understand life and experiences of Dalit in India is basically misnomer. This is basically, deviating from the point of writing. The lived experiences, which we say the life or ethnography of Dalit's life, doesn't need a theoretical grounding all the time. So work brings a lot of comparison of these two women, Baby Kamle's and Urmila Pawar's, in terms of how they proved to be a woman who is equally very eminent in terms of, and then the kind of language they have used, the emancipations which brings up, brought up through their writings, of autobiography, is very important, and they are seen in many of the conferences. So to cut short, like what here I also wanted to think of or rethink, basically, that Dalit literature is one, but the locating the notion of caste vis-a-vis in the context of the occupational associations in the form of pollution, which is very important. If somebody wants to, for example, if we ask some student, young student, that go and find out what is pollution, mostly they'll think of environmental pollutions or pollution which is environmentally written globally. But when you talk of caste-based pollutions, which is brought in through certain occupations, is very important tool to understand the caste structure in India. And this is where somebody who has worked as in particular caste, a manual scavenger, there are stories, there are very fantastic writings on manual scavenger in Telugu and Marathi. But can somebody like me, I cannot write those experiences which I have not lived. But I definitely feel and empathize and find, when as a student of, as a field worker who lived and worked with manual scavenger over more than a year, I can feel that there is still a lot which I cannot express by my own writing, because somebody who is engaged into the similar occupation, which is considered to be, and here I wanted to bring in gender dimension, that most of the writing, if you see in Maharashtra and in the field work of Rajasthan and Telugu states, now I say Telugu states, mostly women have been found a large workforce, in manual scavenging. Uh, we don't say now manual scavenging, we say, tell them as safai karamcharis or sweeper or sanitation workers, as much more nuanced terminology. But in eastern part of India, in Jharkhand, in some locality where I also had done my field, I found it was more men's involvement. Men were much more involved into doing these fields. So what I find that it is important to locate that within the occupation of Dalits or the lower caste in India, there is gender inequality, which feminists have raised, and that we need to. So that is the reason we need to see caste, gender, and marginalization process. So caste is one, but within that you need to look at gender among the Dalits, and within the kind of gender inequality we have within Dalits, that gives a sense that patriarchy operates all across the social groups similarly, similar to how caste operates, across the institution. So these two are important to understand the presence of inequality on the basis of caste and gender within Dalit literature. So somebody, those baby Kamle, Urmila Pawar and others writings, initially these writings were not considered very important writing, because somebody who is a woman cannot be considered as powerful writing. But when these writings were picked up by English writers, translated into English, and went traveled out of the country, it picked up the momentum. And we find that within feminism, that Dalit feminist writers emerged out, and they are celebrated writers now, and giving voices to the millions of people who are living, millions of women who are living as a life of Dalit women. So emancipation through regional languages by various writings are translated into English. So it is not the translation of language, but it is also translating and bringing emancipations to the millions of people through translations into different languages, which is global language in English. So that is a third point. I can understand the presence of sociological nuances in Dalit literature. And the last here I find how Dalit feminism reassert themselves, creates their own independent identity within the discourse of feminism. It is similar to how we also talk of, when we talk of Muslim women, we also find that Muslim women assert themselves and try to write as are giving a different experiences they have within the feminist discourse in India and globally. So these are important. I also was loudly thinking of how some of the notion in sociology or social sciences, in fact humanities as well, when we talk of common sense, like Gramsci's all writings, will those conceptualizations or perspective help us to locate the life world of Dalit, which is rooted differently in India, and doesn't talk of class. I am I begin my understanding, I rest my understanding with the idea that the life world of Dalit cannot be, and it's very difficult to understand from the notion of class. And it is very commonsensical to all of us, because caste, which is deeply rooted and has traveled globally, living in the diasporic community of what the earlier speaker was also referring of Australia or Canada. I have seen that how even in American society, this is kind of lived experiences. People differentiate, on the basis of belongingness they have. So none of the existing dominant nomenclature in sociology or social sciences does help, except that until unless people who live in that life, people who survived for centuries doing those degraded occupations on the basis of being birthed in a family associated to a caste is very important. And there has been very smart also discussion in sociology that, jati is something else, caste is something else. So jati and caste may be conceptually debated different, but how does these conceptual differences or differentiation of cultural differential help us to locate life of Dalit, in sociological writing is more important to any student like me. So I feel that to locate empirically, it is important to have lived experiences, life experiences, and very nuanced experiences, which is available only when some Dalit is living in the life. So Dalit's life world is not only rooted to their own work and birth, but it is also rooted to the neighborhood they live. So the kind of mohalla somebody is living, we still have thousands of villages or mohallas which is named by the caste. So if caste has diminished, has gone down from the reality, why do we have caste based caste based? In fact, in Hyderabad, I'll give you one last example that in Hyderabad, 7 8 years back, I was doing a field. So we also have Muslim scavengers. We had historical sketch and data till 1961, municipal corporation data in Hyderabad, where we find number of Muslim scavengers in Hyderabad. And that gave me to reread why and how Muslims are also engaged into this occupation. So there is also Mohalla. There had been a locality in Hyderabad, main city, by the name of the caste they belong. No. So these are the important questions we need to take away and understand how the sociological text is missing when we talk of Dalits experiences, the marginalizations, and the entire process of social exclusion. When you look at, we cannot replace these notions by studying class, anomy, alienations, or in the name of poverty. We do a lot of it. We have a lot of literature on poverty, but poverty doesn't count how caste as an institutions, deprive the people to remain much more pauper than somebody who is in the privileged caste groups in India. And that helps to understand. So I think it is important to see how sociological writings are also very deprived, very mal. I mean, in fact, there is a dearth of much more writings, field narratives, lived experiences based writings in sociological curriculum, which will bring in fact a new nuanced discussions, not from the lenses of macro sociological theories or macro social scientist theory, but also the indigenous perspective which been bringing, and that may give us, which has been giving a paradigm shift to understand the life of Dalits in the context of gender, caste, family, in Indian society. With this brief, I don't know how much I have taken. If I have crossed my given time, I apologize for that, and I rest myself here. Thank you so much for all of you listening very patiently. Dr. Aslam, thank you so much for giving
Thank
this
you, sir.
opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It was very scholarly discussion. You have added sociological dimension. I hope most of the research scholars are from the Department of Social Sciences, so they will be benefited by your lecture, particularly post-graduation student and research scholars, of course. Uh, it was a great presentation. Even you have entered into minority discourse. That is a very new thing for our audience, as they are saying. Sir, a couple of questions. Uh,
Yeah.
yes. When we look on the four varnas, can you hear me, sir, properly?
Yes, 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 yes. I'm hearing. Please go ahead.
when we look on the four varnas, how do we base it? Something handed by Manu? Do we follow the varna system professed based on karma and not on blood? Let me repeat.
See, yeah.
Yeah. When
No, it's fine.
yeah.
It's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. It's very important and pertinent in the context of today's contemporary life. Very recently, if I don't know whether this is true because I could not personally examine or cross check, but I read a news piece. In Agra, there is a court started by a civil society, and then it's a Hindu court, and people have challenged this in the court judiciary system, court of the country, that how can somebody have Hindu court here where the civil life of people will be decided in terms of marriage, land disputes, etc. And Dr. Pooja Pandey, somebody, if I'm correct, was the name I read in the news that you have judge of the first judge. Now imagine a society which has been struggling, the large number of people who have been struggling to get rid of the birth they lived into, to get rid from the occupational association they found because they were born in a family which decides their occupation. It is nowhere scientifically proven, it is nowhere rational to decide somebody's professions. Today, when we as an individual person, we say, my child should get modern education, scientific education, and emerge as a scholar in the field he or she chooses. But where is the imaginations? Where is the emancipation? Where is the rationality and scientific temperament? And when you talk about caste, how can you think of somebody doing manual scavenging, doing eating dead bodies of animals in the life when we are talking about COVID-19 coronavirus? As every day life, you are finding a notion of science, rationality, systematic examination of real life. So the entire notion of Chaturvarna systems, whether we call in the name of Varna, Jati, later in the form of occupations, which is caste or Jati, doesn't help to understand, except that we understand that this institution still creates and recreates occupational divisions and hegemonizes in the name of caste that somebody should do one occupations, and then they can continue. So there is need to do a lot of re-examinations, not on the basis of what is there, but how a scientific, modern, rational thinking tells you in new writings. We admire a lot about Western writers, but we never do any rational and empirically tested writing in India, and that is how the problem lies, that we celebrate caste as a global diasporic community in America, Australia. This is one of the funniest thing we find in among the Indians, that we celebrate caste outside, and when you come back, you say no, caste is not good. So that is the reason the writing by Dalits will only suppress such kind of celebrations for liberal thinkers, what we say as liberal thinkers.
Sir, one more question. Harish Usmani, sir, don't you feel feminism and feminist activism is a bit perverted comparing this particularly with contemporary generation? Decriminalization of intramarital relation being one of them, debatable is triple talaq, decriminalization of same-sex marriages, one reported recently in Bihar, perhaps Saharsa village. Sir, your take over this feminist and feminism perverted idea?
See, the feminism, when we talk of feminism or the associated notion of feminism, it is one, there need to be discourse. we have, a different paradigm or different platform to locate feminism in India. When we talk of feminism as a whole, Indian feminist writers gradually were very fascinated in 60s, 70s about the feminist writings of America. But then when Black feminists started writing, asserting their identity, it also gave meaningful context to feminists in India, and people from other marginalized groups in India started writing about their life. And when you talk of Dalits, when you talk of Muslim as minority groups, within that, when you have feminism, it talks about their experiences. So that is the reason I was talking. When you talk of caste, when you talk of feminism, it is not only rooted in one caste group. It may be across the religious group. And when somebody talks of feminism in general, somebody may celebrate it, but when Muslim women assert their identity, assert their scientific presence in the public world or public presence in the scientific world, there will be trouble. There will be, this challenges the entire centuries old dogma of values we talk of. So I'll give you one example into when I locate and compare Dalit feminism with those who are writing as Muslim feminists. Parda, for example, was considered to be very noble, part of elite family's life, well, and then somebody, a woman living in the Parda was considered very noble. But look at southern India, when you compare northern or eastern India with southern India, thousands of young women with Parda asserting their identity and going to universities, modern institutions, learning higher educations, and working in new service industry, for example, IT industry. They do night shift in the, one of my students did field work on Muslim women in BP industry, BPO industries. So there will be shift, but that needs experiences. So the experiences which is coming new among religious minorities is very old among the Dalit women.
Thank you, sir. It was overwhelmed, really, with profuse and heterogeneous ideas. Right. Thanks. Once again, I extend my great thanks to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aslam. Thank you so much. It was pleasure being with you. Yeah, God bless you.
Now, I invite Miss Bharti Rai, one of the conveners, or my co-convener of this national webinar, to give vote of thanks. Bharti ji, are you there? Yes, Bharti ji. Okay. Be connected. But you are connected. I can see you. All right.
Am I audible and visible?
Oh, yes.
Good afternoon to all. Greetings to the Honorable VC Sir, Principal Sir, distinguished chief guest speakers and esteemed participants. It has been rightly said that gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from the soul. I consider it a great privilege to propose a vote of thanks and having this opportunity of expressing my sincerest gratitude to all those who made this webinar a memorable event. On behalf of VKSU and Jagjiwan College, first and foremost, I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir D.P. Tiwari, who was throughout supportive to us in this webinar and who, despite of his hectic schedule, graced us with his presence and has always been an encouraging influence. In the next line of thanks, I would like to express my heartfelt indebtedness to Dr. Jawaharlal, whose zeal to take the college to the new heights has propelled us to organize a webinar of this kind. We are grateful that he graced us with his guidance and support throughout and gave us this opportunity to organize this webinar. Now, I personally have heard a lot about Shankar Dutt sir, and it was my privilege and pleasure. And in fact, it was a privilege and pleasure for all of us to listen to the lecture of Professor Shankar Dutt on how Dalit lives matter. He beautifully located Dalit's life and literature on ethical context. His views on the historical nuances of the genealogy of the concept of Dalitism enlightened us with the politics of the construction of caste, how the esteem of caste has been created, and how the religious scriptures have always been uh, complicit in creation of Varna and caste system. His extensive research on political and legal frameworks and the comparison between Gandhian ideology and the ideology of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar provides further avenues of research where we can further explore how heterogeneous Dalitism is in itself. Sir, you enriched us with new insights for future research. We stand highly obliged and thankful to you, sir. Now, I would like to extend my sincerest thanks to Dr. Prabhakar Palaka, who took us a step further from the theory to the practical part of caste discrimination. He exposed how caste discrimination is immanent, all pervasive, and present everywhere. What happens is, on paper, we give rights to the deprived, to the marginalized. But it is in the mind that we are somewhere very prejudiced and very biased. The lecture by Dr. Palaka somewhere was thought provoking, and it propels us to think how philosophy of discrimination lies in the philosophy of exclusion, and how the desire for power is the root cause for the exclusionary politics by the dominant class, how class, caste, and the struggle desire for power all are interrelated, and these things are universal. His lecture propelled us to think how there is a dire need for all of us to cleanse our minds from the web of social discriminatory thoughts in which we, each and everyone, is complicit in each or other way. Sir, your lucid delivery of thoughts kept us engaged throughout and provoked to think at deeper levels. Thank you so much, sir. Now we would like to express our sincerest thanks to Dr. Smriti Singh, who led us to the exploration of a very taboo topic in Indian scenario, that is the bodily integrity of a woman. Her talk on the voyeuristic gaze of a man and the bodily integrity of a Dalit woman was indeed heartrending. Through her lecture, Intercepting the Gaze, Women in Select Dalit Narratives, she expressed the predicament of the triple oppressed section of the society. And it was a commendable bold attempt by man to discuss how a female body is victimized by the voyeuristic gaze of men. We were enriched by a view of women, ma'am, through the Marxist and socialist feminist prism. Thank you so much, ma'am. Then I would like to express my sincerest gratitude and heartfelt thanks to Professor T. Marx. Through his paper, Resisting Hegemonic Discourses, a reading of Dalit writings, he enlightened us on the importance of micro-narratives. And that is a very, very important issue that needs to be dealt today. In exploring the macro narratives, somewhere we tend to ignore the micro narratives. In fact, we can say that micro narratives can provide a bigger picture than the macro narratives about caste discrimination. He emphasized on the need to acknowledge such micro narratives and broadened the scope of the term Dalit by incorporating other India's neglected masses, the untouchables of India. He stressed how we mystify and glorify the canonical writers like Mulkraj Anand without teasing out the narratives and explore how such texts have prejudices that fail to voice the real Dalit experiences. And in our vulnerance, in our respect to these canonical writers, we somewhere fail to question them, and we tend to ignore what are the fallacies in their writings. We need to demystify and tear the narratives to shreds so that we can have a justified perspective. His plea to celebrate the differences calls for attention from every strata of the society. Now I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to Dr. Khwaja Ziauddin, who presented his lecture on sociological nuances in Dalit literature. The very important point he made and which calls attention is that when we tend to heterogenize or homogenize an issue, what we tend to do is we bind it in watertight compartments. That is a fallacy in a research. Through his lecture on Isber Wilkes' book Caste, he provided us with the theory that discrimination is universal. What we tend to do is we always compare that India has so many issues and West is clean of issues. Rather, the point he made is very correct and apt that discrimination is something very universal and it is heterogeneous. Dalit discrimination, Dalit victimization, if it is dealt in detail, you will find it too has so many heterogeneities. So we need to tend to shed off this dichotomy of homogeneous and heterogeneous and be very broad-minded in deciphering the nuances of discrimination. Since no program has become successful with a single person, I extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizing committee members for their support throughout the event. And as any event cannot happen overnight, the wheels started rolling months ago when the idea of such a webinar sprung in the mind of Dr. Aslam. He toiled day and night to let this event happen, and he took notice of the every nuance from the major to the most minor ones, and thus today we can say that his labor bore fruits. I would also like to thank Ayan Enterprises for their logistic support throughout. Once again, I want to state that we at Jagjiwan College, Veer Kunwar Singh University are thankful to the participants from across nations and states. If the event today has been a successful one, it is your contribution and your perseverance, patience that in spite of the minor technical glitches, you emboldened us to proceed. We are fortunate to have you as participants, and in the end, we thank you from the bottom of our heart for being with us in the webinar on equality in unequal India. It has been a great pleasure, and with the hope that we will all gather soon with the same zeal of academic pursuit, I shall put period to my words. Thank you all. Over to you, Aslam sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Bharti ji. And now, thanks to all dignitaries, conveners, all you have done, and no need of saying like this. So now let us end this program. We have taken a lot of times of participants. All right. Thank you. Thank you.